Video creators, does it feel like you're putting yourself out there, putting yourself on the line on a daily basis by creating videos on YouTube? Today, Grant and I are going to be diving deep into Logan Paul's advice on how to deal with hate, staying true in a numbers-obsessed world, and why he thinks that having thick skin is a superpower for online video creators. So in this conversation between musician Prince Royce and Logan Paul, it was said that successful people have to have thick skin. You got to be prepared to be talked about and make mistakes. So they're referring to, creating music, and also for Logan Paul's side, kind of him as a video creator. Grant, yourself, you are a video creator. You have a YouTube channel with over 900,000 subscribers, and you've been in the game for quite a long time, as well as myself. What do you think about this quote about having thick skin as a creator? Is that true?
It's definitely true. I do think the idea of thick skin gets exaggerated. Like, it never stops bothering you, the criticism, or at least for me, it doesn't. However, I do think he's correct in saying that it gets better over time. You kind of get used to it, especially when you start finding real success. I think it's a lot easier to be kind to yourself when other people on the internet are not being so kind to you.
Yeah, no, I think we all know the comment section on YouTube is an ugly place, and you're going to get criticized in there. Do you think that some creators are able to handle this better than others? Do you think it breaks some creators? And what was your overall experience with having thick skin as a creator?
It definitely breaks some creators. And I'd even argue, like, some people take it too far, having the thick skin. I mean, even Logan Paul sometimes, he's not exactly the most self-aware guy. With certain instances, like with the lunch lead situation, kind of how he responded on the podcast with, I don't know, sort of treating it like a joke almost, feeding mold to the children, even if it was an accident. It just kind of like, yes, thick skin, you can develop it over time. It can even become like a superpower and a problem at the same time, kind of creating controversy. And some people, I think you see a lot of like downward spirals of YouTubers, kind of a Sunny V2 video where somebody is dealing with criticism and they apologize too much, and they are they're just overwhelmed by the criticism. I think like Boogie is a good example of this, sort of leaning too far into the criticism, taking it too personally, and just sort of spiraling downwards with it. And as far as my own experience, I mean, I feel like I got less self-conscious the more videos I made. And even just having success, I think there was a period of time where if somebody left a negative comment and they didn't like a video, I would just assume they were wrong. And that was probably like the peak of my confidence, right? I think if you're on cloud nine, then yeah, you're gonna go through a chapter where criticism doesn't bother you that much. But if you're kind of in a darker chapter of your life, then it does bother you. And I think the thick skin, like, it does develop, but it kind of ebbs and flows, right? Depending on how you're doing in life. And with me, like, I would say now I'm probably more sensitive than I was, I don't know, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that, just because I haven't been making content for myself. I've been making content for clients, and it's, I think, easier to be objective when working for clients, and it's harder to be objective working for yourself. So when I do put out a video, if it does get negative comments, I feel like it affects me more just because I'm not making as much content for myself and I'm not used to it. It's kind of like going to the gym, like, if you're doing it consistently, you're strong. But if you kind of stop doing it for a while, then you atrophy a little bit.
And it sounds like no matter what, when you start out, those first comments are going to hurt a lot worse than after you start to grow and you get a fan base and people have your back in the comment section. And, you might have 90% great comments and 10% bad comments. And at that point, there's no reason to let that ruin your day. Because, hey, 90% of people are giving you positive comments. You do have an audience. Right. You have some affirmation that you create good stuff. And it sounds like kind of right now you're at the point where you're almost starting over, and that's recreating these new kind of care about the comments and that kind of stuff. But I think number one, it's just great advice that, hey, if you are going to get into this game, if you are listening to this right now and you're not in the game yet, you want to create content, that, yeah, the thick skin is something that you probably, that most creators will tell you you need to have. So I think that's great advice from Logan Paul. And I'm sure, he's at the mega level to where he's had to have the thickest of skins because he's made some big mistakes. And when they get amplified at that level. So I think I can understand why he said that. The next kind of advice that's given in this video between Logan Paul and this musician is that you got to have the dice rolling mentality. So this is kind of the quote that came from the video, and it's, you got to keep rolling the dice until you hit. And they're talking about creating videos. Do you agree with this kind of philosophy, and kind of expand on what you think this means for creators?
Sure. I think it piggybacks well also off of the thick skin mentality. So the dice rolling mentality is just, you have to try lots of things before you get a big win. Like you often take a lot of L's before you get the W. And that's the point that they're making in this video, where, you're not going to be successful right off the bat, probably. Like even my channel, I was making videos that nobody cared about until finally, we made one that did super well. And you just kind of have to try and fail and keep tweaking things until bam, something happens and it changes everything. It really does. It's like, it can almost feel like nothing is happening until all of a sudden it all happens at once. And that's the dice rolling mentality, where you're just taking risk after risk after risk. And yeah, you want to be responsible. Don't spend all your money or anything, but like just embracing the fact that it's okay to lose, because that's the only way to win eventually.
I think if you do find success on YouTube, and the people that do, they've had their fair share of multiple failed attempts at a video, right? We're talking about whether you're spending a ton of time on a video and you are, investing 20 hours of time into this one video that you're going to publish and it just flops, right? You gambled all that time, or you're spending money, maybe you got props and you paid for, some sort of challenge to happen in this video and you invested all that money and time. That's a risk. That's a gamble. That's a roll of the dice. Or maybe, you're just hiring in an editor, and you're investing money in that way. That's a roll of the dice. You're not always going to hit on YouTube, but if you just keep rolling the dice, you're bound to win eventually. As long as you are paying attention to your audience, and trying to tailor to them a little bit and not just being stubborn in your ways. And I guess the same advice we always give, 1% better with every video, which is actually a lot of percentage. So maybe like 0.01% better with every video is more, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, 100 videos, you'd be making some great videos, although that is a lot of videos. And also too, was mentioned in this video too, just to add to the advice here, is gamble in your creativity. Okay. Creative gambling, meaning trying new things. Okay. Maybe it takes you less time to try something different. That's fine. That's not much of a gamble, but you are gambling with your creativity a little bit, and you're just testing. Okay, testing, coming up with new things. So I think that's a good segue, because we're talking about, I mentioned listening to your audience, making content for your audience. But the next piece of advice that Logan Paul gave, or that was given in this video at least, was you always got to really do your best to stay true to yourself. And here they are talking about the pressure that creators chase when they are chasing trends, trying to stay relevant versus creating authentic content that's true to themselves. I think the example that Mike in the video gave was that the rapper Nas has, all these super famous songs, but for Mike, his favorite song from Nas was just some intro that was an intro to one of the albums. And he, so it's not always the mainstream song, it's not always the mainstream video that you create that is the favorite for somebody or some group of people. So staying true to your values and your creative values, I think, is important in growing an authentic audience. But what is your take on that, Grant? We're basically saying, kind of the opposite of what I mentioned earlier, not listening to your audience more, staying true to yourself and creating content that you like. What's your take on telling a creator that as a piece of advice? Is that good or bad advice?
So I feel like you can go too far in either direction, right? You're either hyper focused on what you want and you're only ever doing what you want, or you're pandering to your audience and nothing you do feels real to anybody. And it's, I think, usually a balance, right? Where you're taking in constructive criticism, you're aware of what your audience wants. But ultimately, I think it should be kind of 60-40, where you're doing what you want and 40% is kind of you paying attention to your audience. That might even be high. I'd say like 80% what you want to do, 20% kind of constructive feedback, and sort of maybe following trends, things like that, if you're focused on growth. Because if you're doing things authentically, you're making things that you truly care about, you're going to end up attracting an audience that truly appreciates you and understands you. Whereas if you're kind of in this trend setting mentality, you are, you end up attracting a lot of people that they don't actually like what you like. And you kind of end up constantly playing this game and digging yourself a deeper and deeper hole where you're trying to appeal to an audience that you don't actually understand, because the way that you attracted them to you was with something that wasn't even authentic to you. It was just something that you thought would perform well. And you know, I've been guilty of this in the past with my channel Treesicle, kind of covering certain games and then really honing in on them that, you know, I liked them, but it ended up becoming far too big of it ended up being too big of the piece of the pie, right? It was just like I was making too much content that I personally wasn't enthusiastic about, and then attracted an audience that I didn't understand. And it was just sort of weird and awkward, and it ended up requiring me to take a step back because I just couldn't really do it anymore. I needed a break. So yeah, you really do need to stay true to yourself a lot more often than you are listening to what you think your audience wants. But you know, you're also not going to grow if you don't take into account criticism, or if you're not kind of being open-minded in taking in new information that maybe you yourself didn't originally believe. So, you know, you need to be open-minded, but not so much that your brain falls out.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's good broad advice, right? Like as general rule, you know, stay true to yourself, be creative, but like, you know, when it comes down to it and you're creating content, like have strategy behind it, always be thinking of a great video topic that will get views, and stay true to yourself, right? You said balance is major. But you know, depending on your goals on YouTube, it's not always to get all these views. And recently there's this big kind of push in the YouTube advice game to not go broad and to stay real specific. And instead of getting 10,000 views on a video, get 1,000 views on the video, but more targeted toward the product you're selling or the audience you're trying to build. And that has been a real common occurrence that I'm seeing pop up everywhere. It's kind of because Alex Hormozy came out and said, yeah, we went and tried to create all this lifestyle vlogs and, you know, day in the life and talk about nutrition and stuff. And you know, we were getting the views, but people were not interested as much. Our real business followers were not interested as much. So we went back to, you know, more targeted content. And, hey, that's like a +1 for the YouTube algorithm to say like, wow, this algorithm can target people so directly, so niche, that even though the videos aren't getting a lot of views, they're still being shown to the right people, because it's not about being known it's not about being known, but it's about being known well. I think it's not about being well known. It's about being known well. Okay. And that's like more of like a deeper connection with your audience. So overall, I think it's generally good advice, but when it comes down to it, like there needs to be some strategy in there too. All right. So the last piece of advice here I want to cover is the unbothered superpower. Having the superpower of being unbothered when there's criticism, when there's those kind of things. The quote here is, unbothered is a great word. If you can move about life unbothered, then you're in a great place. So what do you think that means, Grant? What is the word that they mean by unbothered when they refer to that?
It just means not being irritable or taking things too personally, because I think a lot of what happens to us, whether it's the way somebody treats us or the way something I make performs, it doesn't necessarily have to do with my skill or my value as a person. A lot of it is just sort of randomness, or it's not personal. And being unbothered to me just means you move forward in spite of failure or in spite of criticism. And that doesn't mean don't take in the criticism, but also don't take it in too much. Understand who you are. And I think a lot of this, like, in order to truly be unbothered, I think it does require discipline. If you're not exercising or getting enough sleep or eating well, like, your kind of overall health and mental health, I think, is going to contribute a lot more to being unbothered than simply telling yourself to be unbothered, right? It's kind of like, I think being unbothered is a lifestyle more than just something you can turn on and off. And it's almost, at least to me, like, I think you can practice being unbothered if you eventually accumulate a certain amount of success. You feel like you have less to prove. It's easier to not take things personally because you have this real foundation of confidence, of success. But ultimately, you got to keep up with it, like keep up with your health, your mental health, and all of that will contribute to you being able to kind of take things as they actually are instead of spiraling and worrying and all of that, because I think we're our own worst enemies and we sabotage ourselves so much more often than the world does.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice there. This reminds me of an interview with the coach from the Celtics. The question was about one of his star players, Jason Tatum, and does he get a bunch of unfair criticism? And he said, yeah, what a privilege. This is what he asked for. When you want to be the face of the NBA, when you want to play for the best team that's competing for a championship and be the best player, then you're going to get criticized, and it's going to be unjust a lot of times. And this is exactly what you asked for. So I think, like, in regards to Logan Paul and stuff, they're talking about once you start growing, you need to develop that unbothered superpower to where, this is exactly what you asked for. You wanted to go on YouTube. You wanted to get 100,000 subscribers. You wanted to get to 1 million. Now you're here, and you just put out a video where you said something that you probably shouldn't have said, and you're getting all the criticism. Or you put out a video that's just poor, right? And you have you have an opinion on something that your audience disagrees with. They're going to let you hear it. And that's okay. I think it's understood that this is all part of the process. It's kind of like being a basketball coach in general. You're going to get criticized. When you lose, it's going to be on you. And in this YouTube world, that thick skin that we talked about earlier is going to come into play in multiple scenarios, I think. So, I really like the idea of Logan Paul giving his advice through his lens, because he has gone through so many challenges, and it's pretty general advice. But overall, I think this is good advice and something that you as a video creator can take away and add to your toolbox. And with that said, that's the end of today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe. If you're listening on an audio platform, you can follow us there as well. And we will see you guys in the next video.